Welcome to Animal Encounters. Jackson here. In this episode, we're diving into the worst snake attacks in human history stories that still send chills down the spine of anyone who's ever stepped into tall grass and wandered through the jungle. From a farmer who kept hand-feeding a bushmaster under his shed, to a tourist who picked up a boom slang to prove everyone wrong. It was June 18, 2016, in the humid countryside of rural Bulacan, Philippines, where Henry Page had built his dream into reality. The 34-year-old exotic pet breeder operated from a modest compound tucked away from the main roads, surrounded by dense tropical vegetation and the constant hum of cicadas. His backyard facility housed dozens of serpents in custom-built enclosures, meticulously maintained for his thriving online reptile business. Henry had spent years building his reputation among hobbyists, known for confident handling techniques and educational live streams that drew viewers from around the world. The compound felt isolated that Saturday afternoon, with only distant roosters and the occasional motorbike passing on the dirt road beyond his gates. The air hung thick with moisture from recent rains, creating stable conditions for his cold-blooded collection. Henry had recently acquired his most impressive specimen yet, a massive reticulated python stretching nearly 20 feet and weighing over 60 kilograms. The snake had arrived from another breeder weeks earlier, transported in a reinforced crate that required 3 men to carry. Henry was eager to showcase it in a feeding demonstration for his online audience. Knowing such content would generate significant interest, he'd prepared everything: camera equipment positioned at multiple angles, thawed prey warming to room temperature, and feeding tongs cleaned and ready. But one detail had been overlooked: the worn latch on the python's enclosure that his neighbor had warned needed replacement. The snake was still adjusting after relocation, and the lingering scent of prey could heighten its feeding response. Henry had been working alone more frequently, confident his experience would compensate for the lack of a second handler. Reticulated pythons are among the world's longest snakes, native to Southeast Asia, and capable of taking down prey as large as deer or wild boar. Unlike older assumptions that constrictors kill by slowly suffocating prey, modern research shows their primary mechanism is rapid circulatory arrest. Once coils are secured, intense pressure restricts venous return to the heart and can compress major arteries, sharply reducing blood flow to the brain. Loss of consciousness can occur in under 1 to 2 minutes if carotid or cardiac circulation is significantly compromised. While breathing restriction contributes, the decisive factor is often cardiovascular collapse rather than prolonged oxygen deprivation. Rare but documented human fatalities have occurred within their native range. Henry entered the enclosure alone, confident in his years of experience handling dangerous reptiles. The python lay coiled in the corner, its diamond-patterned scales gleaming under filtered afternoon light. Henry used his hands and a guiding hook to shift part of the serpent's heavy midsection to reposition it for the camera, still working without backup. As he maneuvered the snake, its tail looped suddenly around his right leg. The scent of thawed prey still lingered in the air, intensifying the feeding response. When Henry bent forward to reach for his feeding tongs, the python's powerful body surged upward and began to coil around his waist. The snake's head turned toward his torso as additional loops wrapped around his chest and arms with startling speed. Henry tried desperately to pry the coils apart, but the python had already braced sections of its body against the enclosure wall, using leverage to increase constrictive force. The muscles contracted in coordinated waves, tightening each time Henry exhaled and tried to draw another breath. But it wasn't just his lungs under pressure. The coils compressed his thorax and abdomen with enough force to impede blood returning to his heart. As venous flow decreased and arterial pressure dropped, blood delivery to his brain fell sharply. His attempts to shout were reduced to strained gasps. His vision tunneled sooner than expected. The loss of strength in his arms came not from exhaustion alone, but from rapidly diminishing cerebral perfusion. Within roughly 1 to 2 minutes of sustained full-body constriction, he began slipping into unconsciousness. The python maintained its grip, instinctively continuing the constriction response until all movement ceased. Hours later, after repeated unanswered calls, a courier arriving for a scheduled pickup found the compound eerily quiet. Authorities launched an investigation focusing on safety protocols for private exotic facilities and the risks of handling large constrictors alone. It was August 19th, 2015, when Ramesh Patil rose before dawn in the village of Khanapur, Maharashtra. The monsoon season had reached its peak, flooding rice paddies to knee-depth across the low-lying farmland. Heavy rains over the previous 3 days had displaced wildlife, pushing snakes into agricultural areas where small patches of higher ground offered the only refuge above the waterline. Ramesh was 34 years old, working a 3-acre rice plot inherited from his father. The land provided subsistence living for his wife, 4 children aged 3 through 12, and his elderly mother, all of whom shared a single-room home at the edge of the village. The household survived on approximately $700 annually, relying almost entirely on the success of the rice harvest and occasional seasonal labor. His field lay 1.5 miles from the village center, connected by a narrow dirt path that became slick and uneven during monsoon months. That morning began at 4:45 a.m. Ramesh drank chai quickly and departed at 5:10 a.m., carrying his curved sickle and a small cloth for wiping sweat and rainwater from his hands. The rice plants stood approximately 4 feet tall, heavy with developing grain that bent the stalks low over the flooded rows. Weather forecasts predicted additional afternoon storms, making early morning work essential before rising winds flattened the crop. He wore thin cotton clothing and no footwear, the standard practice for subsistence farmers in the region, allowing better footing in mud and water. Ramesh entered the field from the southwest corner, wading into knee-deep brown water. He began cutting rice stalks methodically, bundling them by hand and stacking them on narrow ridges between rows. Visibility through the dense vegetation remained limited to only a few feet, with submerged ground features impossible to distinguish beneath the surface. Russell's vipers are among Asia's most dangerous snakes, responsible for thousands of envenomations each year across the Indian subcontinent. Adults typically measure 3 to 5 feet in length, with thick bodies patterned in bold geometric markings that provide effective camouflage among mud, straw, and decaying vegetation. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, disrupting blood clotting and damaging blood vessels, leading to progressive bleeding and systemic complications. Encounters increase sharply during monsoon season, when flooding drives vipers into cultivated fields and forces farmers to work barefoot in reduced visibility. The viper had taken refuge on a small elevated mud mound between 2 rice rows, just high enough to remain above the floodwater. Its brown and tan pattern blended into the surrounding debris. At approximately 6:25 a.m., Ramesh's cutting path brought him directly into the row where the snake rested. His left foot came down onto the viper's mid-body. The defensive strike followed immediately, fangs driving into the outer portion of his left ankle. The bite resulted in clear envenomation before the snake released and disappeared into the flooded field. 2 puncture wounds were visible just above the ankle bone, blood welling around them. Intense burning pain radiated from the bite site almost immediately. Within minutes, swelling became apparent, the skin around the ankle tightening as fluid accumulated. As time passed, darkening of the skin developed gradually as bruising spread outward from the wound. Ramesh dropped his sickle and began moving toward the village. Progress was slow along the muddy path, each step sending pain up his leg as swelling increased and stiffness set in. By the time he had covered most of the distance back, more than 30 minutes had passed since the bite. His pace reduced to short, uneven steps. As the effects of the venom progressed, additional symptoms became evident. Nausea set in, followed by repeated vomiting along the path. Blood began appearing along his gums and at his nose as clotting failed, leaving visible streaks on his clothing and hands. His vision blurred intermittently, and physical weakness became increasingly apparent as he struggled to maintain balance. Near the edge of the village path, less than an hour after the bite, his movements became unsteady. He took several steps before collapsing face forward into the mud. Blood continued seeping from his nose and mouth. His breathing became rapid and shallow as strength failed, and he remained where he fell. When Ramesh did not return by sunrise, his son Vikram was sent to look for him at approximately 7:30 a.m. Vikram found his father lying motionless along the path and ran back to the village for help. Several farmers responded, but no one in Khanapur owned a vehicle. A runner was dispatched to a larger village 2 miles away. Approximately 40 minutes passed before a motorcycle arrived. The journey to the hospital covered 35 miles over wet, uneven roads, taking more than 90 minutes. Ramesh Patil died shortly before arrival. His death reflected a pattern repeated across rural India each year, where delayed access to medical care and venom-induced bleeding make Russell's viper bites especially dangerous during monsoon season. It was April 12, 2017, and the rolling limestone hills of the Texas Hill Country stretched under the warm spring sun, their oak woodlands and rocky canyons glowing with fresh color after recent rains. The region's scattered creeks and shaded ravines supported a wide range of wildlife adapted to Central Texas's shifting seasons. Spring storms had triggered a vibrant burst of wildflower blooms, turning normally muted terrain into a photographer's paradise. Rebecca Torres had driven from Austin specifically to capture images of the spring wildflowers that bloomed so rarely in this harsh environment. At 31, the graphic designer had built a reputation for stunning nature photography that provided both artistic fulfillment and escape from her demanding corporate job. Her weekend hiking trips had become essential stress relief, allowing her to disconnect from technology and reconnect with the natural world. Rebecca possessed basic knowledge of desert wildlife from her years of hiking in Texas, but her experience was limited to more common species found in accessible areas. She had never encountered a venomous snake in the wild and had developed a false sense of security based on her previous hiking experiences in less dangerous environments. That morning, Rebecca had hiked several miles along one of the hill country's lesser-used trails, following reports of exceptional wildflower displays in areas rarely visited by casual tourists. The recent rains had created ideal conditions for both wildflower growth and increased reptile activity, as snakes and small mammals moved closer to the surface to take advantage of the moisture. Western coral snakes are among the most venomous serpents in North America, possessing potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes progressive paralysis. These small, colorful snakes are often confused with harmless species due to their distinctive red, yellow, and black banding pattern. Despite their typically reclusive nature, coral snakes can deliver dangerous bites when handled or accidentally contacted, and their venom typically causes respiratory failure within 8 to 24 hours of envenomation. Their small fangs and secretive behavior often result in bites going unnoticed until serious symptoms develop. While photographing a cluster of bright yellow wildflowers, likely Engelmann daisies, Rebecca noticed a brightly colored snake partially exposed among the flowers, likely displaced from cover by recent rains and increased surface activity. The serpent's bright red, yellow, and black bands created a striking contrast against the golden blooms, and Rebecca immediately recognized the potential for an award-winning photograph. Rebecca approached the snake slowly, and investigators later concluded she had likely misidentified it as a harmless species based on her close camera positioning in the photos. She used a small stick to nudge the surrounding vegetation, unintentionally disturbing the snake as she tried to improve the lighting for her shot. The serpent remained coiled in place, a posture herpetology consultants later described as consistent with a disturbed but non-aggressive coral snake. As Rebecca adjusted her camera position, investigators later concluded, based on faint puncture or scrape marks on her finger and the final images on her camera, that she had come into accidental contact with the coral snake's head. Bite marks from coral snakes can be subtle or easily missed, so the photographs were critical to establishing proximity. The wound characteristics suggested the snake made brief contact and may have worked its small, fixed fangs in a short chewing motion before retreating, a known envenomation behavior for elapid coral snakes when disturbed at close range. Camera timestamps showed she continued photographing the area for several minutes afterward, unaware she had sustained a bite. Because coral snake marks can be minimal, investigators relied on the images, timestamps, and later symptoms to link the exposure to her decline. She then spent several more hours photographing other wildflower sites along the trail, still unaware that the venom had entered her system. The coral snake's venom worked gradually, initially causing no noticeable symptoms as she hiked to other wildflower locations throughout the morning. By late afternoon, early symptoms, fatigue and weakness appeared, which she assumed were due to dehydration and heat exposure from the long hike. As evening approached, the neurotoxic effects became more pronounced, causing difficulty with coordination and speech that made hiking back to her vehicle increasingly challenging. The coral snake venom caused progressive paralysis that eventually affected Rebecca's respiratory system during the night, making it impossible for her to call for emergency assistance. Her cell phone showed no signal in the remote area, and her weakening condition had prevented her from reaching her vehicle before collapsing. Local search and rescue teams discovered Rebecca's body 2 days later, when she failed to check out of her reserved campsite. Her camera contained the final photographs she had taken, showing her close proximity to the coral snake and documenting the moments leading up to her fatal encounter. The images provided valuable evidence for the investigation and served as a reminder of the hidden dangers present in seemingly peaceful natural settings. The investigation confirmed her cause of death as respiratory failure resulting from an untreated coral snake envenomation. Rangers recovered her camera beside her body, and the final sequence of images helped establish how close she had been to the snake before the bite. The case was later incorporated into seasonal safety briefings, emphasizing proper wildlife identification and the risks of approaching animals for photography. It was August 3rd, 2018. And the morning sun had already baked the red earth of Mukuvisi woodlands into a hard crust. Lemani Chikweche was 6 hours away from retirement, unaware that one of Africa's deadliest serpents lay coiled in the shadows. Lemani Chikweche was a 58-year-old senior ranger at the Mukuvisi Woodlands Reserve on Harare's southern outskirts. He had built his reputation on strict adherence to bush safety protocols and an almost legendary ability to read animal behavior. Rangers half his age still repeated his training mantras about snake identification and proper evacuation procedures. This final patrol before his retirement ceremony was meant to be ceremonial, a last walk through the territory he had protected for 3 decades. That morning's patrol was routine by design. Lemani had requested a junior ranger named Tapiwa Moyo accompany him, wanting to pass along final observations about the eastern boundary trails where poaching signs had recently appeared. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Lemani stopped the patrol vehicle near a large termite mound, roughly 200 yards from the main access road. He informed Tapiwa he needed to relieve himself and would step behind the mound for privacy. Tapiwa remained in the vehicle, facing the direction Lemani had gone, maintaining standard protocol for paired patrols. The area around the mound showed signs of recent animal activity, disturbed soil and scattered debris that might have indicated a burrow system nearby. The entire reserve had experienced an unusually active snake season that year, with sightings up nearly 40% according to incident logs. Staff meetings had emphasized heightened caution, particularly around rock piles and termite structures where mambas often sheltered during the heat of the day. Lemani himself had led 2 of those training sessions, demonstrating proper approach techniques and safe distances. Less than 30 seconds after disappearing behind the mound, Lemani suddenly recoiled back into view. His movement was sharp and controlled rather than panicked. Tapiwa watched as Lemani pivoted to face him, his right hand gripping his left calf. Without raising his voice, Lemani stated clearly that he had been bitten and pointed toward the base of the termite mound, where a large gray-brown snake was withdrawing into a crevice. Tapiwa, who had completed Lemani's own snake identification course, immediately recognized the coffin-shaped head and rapid retreat as characteristic of a black mamba. Black mambas can grow up to 14 feet in length, making them Africa's longest venomous snake. They possess potent neurotoxic venom that, without treatment, causes respiratory paralysis. Unlike many snakes that bite defensively and retreat, mambas are known for their speed, capable of moving at 12 miles per hour, and their tendency to deliver multiple strikes when cornered. Tapiwa immediately moved in, applied a broad pressure bandage, and splinted Lemani's lower limb. They carried him to the vehicle on an improvised stretcher to avoid exertion. The wrap covered the entire lower leg from the toes upward with firm, even pressure. 2 small puncture wounds were visible on Lemani's lower left calf, approximately 3 inches above the ankle, with minimal bleeding. With Tapiwa's assistance, Lamani was secured in the passenger seat, while Tapiwa drove toward the main gate at reduced speed, avoiding the jolts and bumps that might accelerate venom circulation. The internal dirt track was rutted and uneven, forcing speeds below 15 miles per hour for much of the 3-mile distance. Approximately 20 minutes after the bite, Lamani reported numbness spreading from his foot up through his knee. His speech remained clear, but he mentioned a metallic taste in his mouth, a known early symptom of neurotoxin absorption. By the time they reached the main gate 30 minutes later, his eyelids had begun drooping, and his words came slower. The reserve's radio contact with external medical services had been intermittent due to equipment issues, causing a 15-minute delay in ambulance dispatch. No Black Mamba antivenom was stored at the reserve, requiring transport to a hospital in central Harare. Vision blurring became pronounced as they met the ambulance at the highway junction. During the ambulance ride, his respiratory effort became labored despite oxygen administration. Paralysis was advancing through the muscle groups controlling breathing. They reached the hospital 77 minutes after the bite. Medical staff administered polyvalent antivenom, but the neurological damage had already progressed significantly. Lamani lost consciousness as respiratory muscles failed. Mechanical ventilation was initiated, but his condition continued deteriorating. He was pronounced dead at 1:43 p.m. from respiratory arrest secondary to neurotoxic envenomation. Mukuvisi Woodlands held a small memorial service 3 days later, attended by rangers Lamani had trained and the families he had served alongside. Local news covered the incident briefly, noting the irony of an experienced ranger dying from the very hazard he had spent decades teaching others to avoid. It was August 19, 2014. Gainesville, Florida sits in the north-central part of the state, a mid-sized college town surrounded by flatwoods and scrubby forest, with the kind of humid summer heat that doesn't let up even after dark. By mid-August, the temperature barely drops below 80 degrees Fahrenheit at night, and inside a small rental house with a struggling window unit, it would have been warmer than that. Sheldon Creel was 31 and had been keeping snakes since he was a teenager. Not casually, he had built his entire life around it. He kept a rotating collection in his spare bedroom, most of them non-venomous, all housed in enclosures he had built or modified himself. No formal training, no certifications, nothing official. Everything he knew came from online forums, care sheets, and years of hands-on experience. In those circles, Sheldon had a reputation. He was the guy people messaged when they had questions. He had never been seriously wrong yet, and that kind of track record has a way of making a person stop second-guessing themselves. Most people assume the boomslang shouldn't be dangerous. It doesn't look the part. A slender African tree snake with oversized eyes and a docile appearance, rear-fanged like most colubrids, which are generally harmless to humans. The boomslang is the exception. It can open its jaw nearly 170 degrees and bites by holding on, chewing venom through grooved rear fangs. A full envenomation triggers disseminated intravascular coagulation, dismantling the body's ability to clot entirely. Hemorrhaging follows in the muscles, organs, and brain. What makes it uniquely dangerous is the timeline. Symptoms can take 15 hours or more to fully develop, and in that window, a bite can feel like almost nothing. Boomslang antivenom is produced in limited quantities in South Africa and was effectively unavailable in the United States in 2014. If you were bitten and needed it, you were almost certainly not getting it in time. Sheldon had acquired his boomslang about a year earlier through a private exotic reptile trade. A captive-bred juvenile he had raised into a healthy adult male, vivid green with the characteristic enormous eyes. He kept it in a modified glass enclosure in his spare bedroom, the lid secured with metal clips he had added himself after the original latch felt unreliable. He was proud of that setup and wasn't shy about saying so. But how much does a perfect track record actually tell you about what's coming? Out of everything in his collection, the boomslang was the one Sheldon handled differently, more deliberately, more carefully, slower movements, more attention to positioning. He had a specific routine with it that he didn't use with his other animals, and that routine had worked every single time. A year of clean, uneventful interactions had a way of making even a dangerous snake feel manageable. Familiar, even. and somewhere in that familiarity, the edge of caution had quietly worn down. He had noticed the clips on the lid feeling slightly loose again about a week before, the same issue he had fixed once already. He made a mental note to sort it out. He hadn't gotten around to it yet. His roommate had left that afternoon for a few days, out of town. The house was Sheldon's for the next 2 days. No one expecting him anywhere, no one checking in, no reason for anyone to notice if something went wrong. It was the kind of ordinary solitude that doesn't feel significant until it is. On the evening of August 19th, Sheldon had been handling several of his animals. At some point, he opened the boomslang's enclosure. Whether to feed it, handle it, or just check on it isn't clear. The snake bit him on the left hand while he was managing it. Because the boomslang is rear-fanged, a full envenomation requires the snake to hold on and work the venom in. It's not the accident of a split second. No immediate swelling, no serious pain, just a mild, burning sensation. Maybe some slight nausea building over the following hours. The kind of thing that could easily feel like nothing, like something that could be slept off. Sheldon didn't call for help. Whether he recognized the bite for what it was and decided to ride it out, or genuinely believed it was minor, there's no way to know. At some point that night, he went to bed. His roommate came back 2 days later and found him unresponsive on his bed, the television still on, a half-eaten meal on the coffee table. The boomslang's enclosure was closed, but one of the metal clips was unfastened. Post-mortem confirmed hemotoxic envenomation, consistent with a boomslang bite, disseminated intravascular coagulation, hemorrhaging across multiple organ systems, including the lungs and brain. Cause of death was hemorrhagic shock, secondary to complete coagulopathy failure. No boomslang antivenom had been administered or was available at any facility within range. His phone showed no outgoing messages after 7:43 p.m. on August 19th. The case was ruled accidental. It was June 7th, 2019. The late morning sun cut hard across a stretch of scrubland on the outskirts of a farming community in the Western Cape province of South Africa, the fynbos vegetation brittle from an unusually dry winter. Peter Van Wyk, 38, was a part-time nature guide and amateur herpetologist who led weekend excursions for tourists visiting the region. He had handled snakes informally since his teenage years and had completed 2 short courses on reptile handling through a private wildlife program in the province. He owned a lidded transport container, leather gloves, and a proper snake hook. He did not have any of these items with him that morning. He had driven out to check a fence line on a property where he did occasional maintenance work, not expecting to encounter anything. The puff adder is responsible for more snakebite fatalities in Africa than any other species on the continent. Adults typically measure between 3 and 4 feet, but their thick bodies and cryptic camouflage make them extremely easy to overlook against dry ground. Their venom is potently cytotoxic, destroying tissue at the cellular level and causing severe local necrosis, systemic coagulopathy, and cardiovascular collapse in serious cases. They are also capable of extremely rapid strikes despite their slow general movement, a fact that surprises even experienced handlers. At approximately 10:45 a.m., Peter noticed what he initially took to be a section of coiled rope near the base of a fence post. The brown and tan chevrons on a thick-set body blended almost perfectly with the dry grass and reddish soil surrounding it. He stopped and recognized it immediately as a puff adder, an adult female estimated at just under 4 feet. Peter knew the snake was dangerous. He knew he lacked his equipment. He decided to attempt a relocation anyway, reasoning that the puff adder was positioned directly beside a gate that the property owner's children used to access the backfield after school. He believed his experience was sufficient to compensate for the missing tools. He found a length of stiff wire fence off-cut and attempted to use it as a makeshift hook. The wire was too flexible. When he tried to lever the snake's midsection upward, it bent under the animal's weight, and the snake shifted sideways. The puff adder struck without warning. No hood flare, no audible hiss, no obvious coiling. It simply moved, its head traveling the full extension of its reach in a fraction of a second. The right fang penetrated the back of Peter's left hand between the knuckles of the ring and little fingers. He reported feeling a sensation like a hot nail driven into the bone. The snake retracted, and resumed its coiled position as though nothing had happened. Peter drove himself to a clinic in the nearest town, approximately 25 minutes away. At that point, roughly 35 minutes after the strike, the wound site had already begun swelling noticeably, the tissue pale and firm with redness spreading outward. The pain was severe and radiating rapidly toward his wrist. The clinic administered a single polyvalent antivenom unit, all they had, and arranged transfer to a larger hospital in the provincial capital, a 90-minute drive away. By the time he was loaded into the transfer vehicle, the edema had consumed his entire hand and extended past his wrist. The skin over his knuckles had blistered, the fluid beneath visibly discolored with early hemorrhage. His fingers had spread apart under the swelling's pressure. He described the pain as no longer feeling like his hand at all, more like something attached to him that he could not control. During transport, his blood pressure began dropping. His pulse was elevated at 124, blood pressure 88/54 by the time they reached the hospital. Faint purple bruising had appeared across his palm as capillaries broke down beneath the skin. At the hospital, lab work confirmed severe coagulopathy, his fibrinogen critically low, platelet count falling, clotting times significantly prolonged. Blood seeped continuously from his IV insertion site. A urine sample showed traces of blood, indicating early renal involvement. Surgery was performed that evening when compartment pressure measurements returned, and his radial pulse had become difficult to locate. Intraoperatively, the necrosis was wider than the external presentation had suggested, the muscle fibers dark and unresponsive along the path of venom diffusion. Peter remained in intensive care for 6 days. He survived, partly due to the early antivenom administration and his general physical health. But he lost the ring and little fingers of his left hand to necrosis, and his remaining hand function was significantly impaired. His career as a nature guide ended. In the toxicology case report that documented his treatment, he later told medical staff that he had believed his experience was sufficient, and that the certainty of that belief was precisely what had put him at risk. His case is used in regional snakebite response training as an example of a specific and underappreciated risk category. Not the uninformed tourist, not the reckless teenager, but the partially trained responder who mistakes familiarity for control. He later noted that the gate he had been so concerned about was located on the far side of the property from where the snake was found. The children would not have encountered it. It was January 7th, 2017, a scorching summer day in the Australian outback. By midday, temperatures had climbed to 42 degrees Celsius, baking the red earth and leaving the air heavy and still. The cattle station where Connor Mitchell worked sprawled across 150,000 acres of semi-arid scrubland, located more than 200 kilometers west of Longreach in central Queensland. The property operated as a self-contained operation, with fuel storage, machinery sheds, and worker quarters clustered around a central yard separated from grazing land by miles of fencing. Connor was 19 years old, originally from a Brisbane suburb. After dropping out of university, he took the station job seeking independence and experience away from city life. The work offered steady pay, long hours, and isolation far removed from the city. His social media accounts frequently featured photographs and short videos documenting his outback lifestyle to an audience of roughly 12,000 followers, including images of cattle musters, wide-open landscapes, and heavy machinery. He had been employed at the station for 8 months as a general hand, rotating through fencing repairs, yard maintenance, and equipment servicing. During his first week, Connor attended a mandatory safety orientation alongside other new hires. Management emphasized heat exposure, heavy equipment hazards, and venomous wildlife, with repeated instructions never to approach or interfere with snakes under any circumstances. Station policy required employees to report sightings and allow animals to move on without disturbance. Connor acknowledged the briefing and returned to work. That Saturday fell during the midday shutdown period, when extreme heat made outdoor labor unsafe. Most staff remained inside shaded quarters or rested near cooling fans and water tanks. Connor moved toward the equipment shed on the edge of the workyard, an area bordered by packed dirt, fuel drums, spare fencing materials, and parked vehicles that provided intermittent shade. Shortly before 1 p.m., he noticed a large snake resting along the shed's foundation, partially shaded from the sun. The snake measured roughly 5 feet in length, with a slender build and dark coloration that blended with the dirt and concrete. Based on its appearance and the region, it was later believed to be consistent with an inland taipan, also known as the fierce snake, an extremely venomous species occasionally encountered in remote central Queensland. Inland taipans possess venom dominated by powerful neurotoxins and myotoxins capable of rapidly disrupting nerve transmission, muscle function, and blood clotting. Envenomation can progress quickly, with severe symptoms developing within minutes. Although typically reclusive, inland taipans will strike defensively if cornered or threatened, often delivering multiple rapid bites. The snake remained still as Connor approached. When he moved closer, it shifted position, coiling tightly with its head raised. Connor stepped around the shed corner and returned with a wooden stake and an old canvas pillowcase, items commonly used for handling feed and debris. The narrow space between the shed wall and parked equipment limited the snake's escape route. Connor advanced to within several feet. As the stake moved toward the snake, it struck defensively, contacting the wood. Connor pulled back, then stepped forward again, extending the pillowcase. 2 defensive strikes landed in rapid succession, one to his left hand and another almost immediately to his right forearm. Afterward, the snake slipped beneath a nearby vehicle and disappeared. Connor stepped back and looked down at his arms. 2 puncture wounds were visible, blood seeping from both sides. Within minutes, the pain intensified, spreading rapidly up his limbs. Profuse sweating began almost immediately despite the dry heat, followed by nausea and dizziness. His condition deteriorated quickly. Muscle weakness set in within 15 minutes, first affecting his hands and forearms, then spreading to his shoulders and legs. His breathing became labored as coordination failed. He attempted to walk toward the main station buildings, roughly 400 meters away, but stopped repeatedly, bracing himself against fencing and equipment. Less than 30 minutes after the bite, Connor's gait collapsed entirely. His legs buckled near the edge of the workyard, and he fell onto the red dirt. He attempted to push himself upright once more before remaining where he lay, breathing shallowly as paralysis progressed. The station hand noticed Connor's absence shortly after 1:30 p.m. After a brief search of the yard and surrounding sheds, Nibbler located him unresponsive near the equipment area at approximately 1:40 p.m. Station management was notified immediately, and emergency protocols were activated. A call was placed for an aircraft. An aircraft was dispatched, but the remote location required significant travel time. Upon arrival, medical personnel pronounced Connor Mitchell dead at the scene. The cause of death was later attributed to rapid neurotoxic envenomation from an inland taipan, compounded by extreme heat and the absence of immediate antivenom. Station management conducted a formal review of safety procedures following the incident. It was August 7, 2018, in the ancient temple complex of Tamil Nadu, India, where centuries-old stone structures rose from meticulously maintained gardens filled with sacred banyan trees and flowering jasmine. The temple grounds stretched across several acres, creating a peaceful sanctuary where pilgrims came to seek blessings and tourists marveled at the intricate carvings that adorned every surface. Sintra Cobb, a 51-year-old visiting herbalist from Germany, had traveled to India to study traditional plant medicines and their ceremonial uses in Hindu culture. Known for her calm demeanor and deep respect for ancient practices, Sintra had spent decades working with various healing traditions around the world. Her background included extensive experience handling non-venomous snakes during ceremonial demonstrations in her home country. The temple complex was renowned for its population of resident cobras, which were considered sacred guardians of the ancient site. Warning signs posted throughout the gardens advised visitors to immediately contact trained snake rescuers if they encountered any serpents, but many pilgrims viewed the snakes as divine messengers rather than dangerous predators. Sintra was visiting with her extended family, who had been showing her the various shrines and explaining the spiritual significance of different areas within the complex. The late afternoon heat had driven most visitors to seek shade, leaving the garden pathway days relatively deserted. As they walked along a stone-lined path near the main shrine, Sintra spotted a large cobra coiled beneath a flowering bush, approximately 10 feet from the walkway. The Indian cobra is one of the most medically significant venomous snakes on the subcontinent and, along with species such as Russell's viper, is responsible for many serious and sometimes fatal bites each year. These formidable serpents can reach lengths of 6 feet and possess fangs capable of delivering potent neurotoxic venom. Their venom contains toxins that interfere with nerve signaling, leading to progressive muscle weakness and paralysis. Early symptoms often include drooping eyelids, difficulty speaking or swallowing, and increasing fatigue, followed by worsening respiratory weakness if untreated. Without prompt antivenom, assisted breathing, and rapid transport to advanced care, severe envenomation can quickly become life-threatening as breathing muscles fail and oxygen levels drop. Sintra approached the cobra slowly, believing her experience with European snakes had prepared her for this encounter. She picked up a thin branch from the ground and attempted to gently guide the serpent away from the path, where other visitors might accidentally disturb it. The cobra initially remained motionless, but as Sintra moved closer and extended the stick toward its body, the snake suddenly raised its distinctive hood and reared back in a classic defensive posture. Instead of retreating, Sintra made the fatal decision to reach forward and grasp the cobra's tail, believing she could safely relocate it using techniques that had worked with non-venomous species. The cobra struck upward with lightning speed, its fangs penetrating deep into Sintra's right forearm just below the elbow. As is typical of defensive cobra bites, it struck and released almost instantly before slithering away into the dense vegetation. Sintra dropped the stick and stepped back, examining the 2 distinct puncture wounds that were already beginning to swell. Her family members rushed to her side and immediately began escorting her toward the temple entrance so they could arrange urgent medical transport, calling for help from nearby staff and attempting to clear a path through the grounds. During the hurried effort to reach help, the neurotoxic venom began affecting Sintra's nervous system. Her speech gradually became slurred as weakness spread through the muscles of her face and throat. Walking grew increasingly difficult, forcing her family to support her as they moved toward the parking area. Her breathing became more strained, and her eyelids drooped as the effects progressed. Her condition worsened rapidly during transport as they attempted to get her to medical care, and by the time emergency assistance was fully coordinated, she had lost consciousness. Despite continued efforts, the lack of rapid access to antivenom and assisted breathing proved critical, and she later succumbed to respiratory failure caused by the envenomation. Local authorities conducted a thorough investigation into the incident, reviewing safety protocols at religious sites known to harbor venomous wildlife. The temple administration implemented new warning systems, clearer multilingual hazard notices, and increased the presence of trained snake handlers during peak visiting hours. Educational briefings for tour groups were also expanded to stress that even experienced animal handlers should never attempt to move wild snakes. Sintra's family established a foundation promoting snakebite awareness and emphasizing the importance of leaving wildlife handling to trained professionals. It was September 19th, 2014, and the humid evening air of Miami hung heavy with the promise of another tropical storm as residents of an apartment complex settled into their weekend routines. The 3-story building, home to young professionals and working families, buzzed with the sounds of televisions, conversations, and air conditioning units working overtime against the oppressive heat. In apartment 2B, Carlos Mendoza was preparing for what he hoped would be an impressive evening with a woman he had met at a local bar. Carlos Mendoza had been working construction in South Florida for 8 years, building a reputation as a reliable worker who wasn't afraid of dangerous jobs or long hours in challenging conditions. At 26, the Guatemalan native had established himself in Miami's competitive construction industry, but friends and co-workers later told investigators he had a habit of taking unnecessary risks, both at work and at home. 2 months earlier, during a construction project in Honduras, Carlos had encountered a local animal dealer who convinced him to purchase what the man described as an exotic but manageable pet snake. The dealer had downplayed the extreme danger of the fer-de-lance, describing it as just another tropical serpent that would make an impressive conversation piece for Carlos's Miami apartment. Carlos had successfully smuggled the highly venomous snake back to Florida, keeping it hidden in a converted aquarium in his bedroom closet. His knowledge of snake care came entirely from YouTube videos and online forums where he had absorbed dangerously incomplete information about handling venomous species. His 2 months of successful feeding had convinced him that the snake was as docile and manageable as the internet sources had suggested. According to the wildlife officer who examined the enclosure, the snake showed signs of chronic stress, including dehydration and poor muscle tone. The cramped aquarium lacked proper temperature and humidity, and investigators noted Carlos had been intermittently using a space heater and misting the tank, which kept the snake alive but highly stressed. Recent feedings showed persistent defensive behavior, leading specialists to conclude it had been increasingly reactive for weeks. Fer-de-lance snakes are among the most dangerous venomous serpents in the Western Hemisphere, responsible for more human fatalities than any other snake species in their native range. These aggressive pit vipers possess potent hemotoxic venom that can cause rapid tissue destruction, severe internal bleeding, and progressive circulatory failure. Adult specimens can reach lengths of over 6 feet and are documented as highly defensive when confined or stressed, especially in inadequate enclosures. Their heat-sensing capabilities and lightning-fast strike speed make them formidable predators that even experienced herpetologists handle with extreme caution. That evening, Carlos had been drinking beer while preparing his apartment for his date's arrival. His alcohol consumption had further impaired his already poor judgment regarding the dangerous animal he kept hidden in his bedroom. He decided that showing off his exotic pet would be the perfect way to impress his guest and demonstrate his adventurous nature. Carlos approached the enclosure with the same overconfidence he'd shown during feedings, unaware of how quickly a fer-de-lance can strike at close range. When Carlos reached into the enclosure, investigators later concluded, based on blood spatter on the tank's interior lip and the position of pooled blood near the enclosure, that the fer-de-lance struck at very close range. The 6-foot serpent delivered a significant unvenomation, supported by the rapid swelling documented at the scene and the depth of the wound noted in medical reports. The bite pattern and tissue damage indicated brief contact, a behavior herpetology consultants said is consistent with high-volume envenomation in stressed pit vipers. The potent hemotoxic venom caused rapid tissue damage at the bite site and early signs of circulatory instability, progressing quickly as his condition deteriorated. Carlos managed to call 911, but his deteriorating condition and panic made it impossible for him to coherently explain what had bitten him. According to the call transcript, the dispatcher struggled to interpret his fragmented phrases and slurred descriptions of the animal and his worsening condition. Paramedics arrived to find Carlos in severe shock, his arm grotesquely swollen and his vital signs rapidly declining. The fer-de-lance venom had caused severe internal bleeding and progressive circulatory failure that proved impossible to reverse. Carlos went into cardiac arrest during transport. Despite prolonged resuscitation attempts, he was pronounced dead later that night at the hospital. The discovery of the illegal fer-de-lance in Carlos's apartment prompted wildlife officers to add the incident to ongoing case files in South Florida. His death underscored how dangerous unregulated ownership of venomous wildlife can be, especially when the species involved is capable of delivering a fatal bite. It was September 12th, 2016, and the morning sun filtered through palm fronds onto the stone garden of a private villa in Ubud, Bali. The air hung heavy with tropical humidity as he wandered among ornamental rocks that concealed one of Southeast Asia's deadliest serpents. Marshall Duval, 53, a retired mechanical engineer from Naperville, Illinois, was visiting Bali for the first time to see his daughter Karina, a lifestyle influencer. He preferred exploring alone, often rising early while his wife slept. This trip marked his first visit to Southeast Asia, and Karina had convinced him by booking a private villa with modern amenities. That morning, she had left for a sunrise photo shoot while his flight arrived ahead of schedule. The villa sat on a sloping property surrounded by traditional Balinese rock gardens, where moss-covered stones were stacked artfully among ferns and flowering shrubs. What Marshall likely did not know was that he was entering prime habitat for the Malayan krait, a highly venomous snake that shelters beneath rocks and logs during daylight hours. These serpents grow to lengths of 5 feet and possess potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system, causing progressive paralysis and respiratory failure over the course of several hours. The villa's property manager had placed laminated warning signs in both English and Indonesian near the garden entrance, clearly stating the presence of venomous snakes and advising guests to wear closed-toe shoes and avoid disturbing rocks. The warnings included photos of crates and instructions to seek immediate medical attention if bitten. Whether Marshall noticed these signs and dismissed them, or simply missed them in his jet-lagged state, would never be determined. He had slipped on flip-flops and walked directly into the rock garden. Karina would later say that he was likely attracted by the unusual purple orchids in the garden. At the edge of the frame of a security camera, Marshall could be seen crouched near the orchids, bracing one hand against a flat stone while reaching forward. His movement shifted several rocks beside a shadowed crevice, where a 4-foot crate had been resting motionless since dawn. The snake struck his exposed ankle in a reflexive, defensive bite, its fangs penetrating just above his sandal strap. Marshall jerked back, expecting sharp pain, but felt only a mild prick similar to a thorn scratch. He sat on a nearby bench and examined his ankle, finding 2 small puncture marks with barely any bleeding and no significant swelling. He initially shrugged it off. Within 45 minutes, his legs began feeling unusually heavy, as if weighted down. His stride became unsteady, and he grabbed at a decorative pillar for balance. When he attempted to call out to a gardener working near the pool, his words came out slurred and thick, his tongue not responding properly. The gardener, a local man named Wayan, noticed Marshall swaying and clutching the pillar with both hands. He hurried over, immediately asking what was wrong. Marshall tried explaining about the bite, but his speech had deteriorated significantly. His eyelids drooped halfway closed, giving him a drowsy appearance, and he blinked repeatedly, trying to clear his vision. Wayan recognized the symptoms from stories shared by village elders and insisted they immediately manage his airway and transport him to the hospital, emphasizing the need for oxygen support. Marshall resisted, concerned about medical costs abroad and not wanting to alarm Karina over what still seemed minor. Wayan half-carried him towards the villa's car, and Marshall finally agreed to phone his daughter. The call lasted less than a minute. Marshall's voice was weak and strained, the words barely intelligible. He told Karina about the bite and that he was heading to the hospital but would be fine. She heard the slurring and told him she was leaving immediately. During the 35-minute drive, Marshall's condition worsened. His neck muscles failed to support his head. Breathing became shallow and labored, and he could no longer swallow, saliva pooling at his mouth. He remained conscious but mute, his vocal cords paralyzed. Traffic delays forced them to divert to a smaller regional clinic instead of the larger hospital originally planned. They arrived at the rural clinic about 2 hours after the bite. Medical staff immediately suspected crate envenomation, preparing antivenom while attempting to arrange transfer due to the lack of a mechanical ventilator on site. Airway management was delayed as staff struggled to stabilize him with basic oxygen support. Within minutes, paralysis reached his diaphragm, and breathing ceased before intubation could be established. Staff attempted manual ventilation and administered antivenom, but Marshall went into cardiac arrest. Despite resuscitation efforts, he was pronounced dead roughly 3 hours after the bite. The footage was handed over to authorities and wasn't released to the public. Karina arrived at the hospital 2 hours after her father's death. The body was flown back to Illinois days later. It was April 22nd, 2017. The Texas Hill Country is a stretch of rolling limestone terrain, cedar scrub, and open grassland that pulls people in every spring when the wildflowers come in. Private eco-tours through the area were common by the mid-2000s. Small groups, a local guide, a few hours walking through brush and rocky terrain. The kind of thing you book on a free afternoon without thinking twice. Wellen Tyndall was 33 and had driven up from San Antonio for the weekend with a friend. She wasn't an outdoors person. Desk job, city life. Booked the tour on a whim after seeing it listed at a local visitor center. No hiking experience, no real knowledge of local wildlife. She wore light clothing, thin canvas sneakers, and carried nothing more than a small bag and her phone. The tour group was 6 people, including the guide. Just a free Saturday afternoon and something different to do. The western diamondback rattlesnake is the most encountered venomous snake in Texas and one of the most dangerous in North America. Adults commonly reach 4 to 5 feet and can push 15 pounds in larger individuals. Their venom is hemotoxic, destroys tissue, disrupts clotting, causes rapid swelling and internal bleeding. Without anti-venom, a serious bite can become life-threatening within hours. What most people don't know is that in a small percentage of cases, the body's response to the venom itself can be just as dangerous as the venom, and it can move faster than anyone expects. The tour had been going about 40 minutes when the group reached a rocky outcrop along a dry creek bed. Sun-warmed limestone, exactly the kind of spot a western diamondback uses in spring to warm up. The path narrowed here, skirting the edge of the outcrop in single file. The guide mentioned it casually. Stay on the path, watch your step, the usual thing he said at this part of the route. The kind of warning that sounds routine enough that nobody really registers it. The group moved through slowly, taking in the view, a few people stopping to photograph the wildflowers growing along the creek bed below. The guide had just pointed out a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. Most of the group was looking up. Wellen was near the back, watching the hawk, when she drifted, just a foot or two off the path, the kind of small, unconscious step that happens when you're not watching your feet. The snake was coiled at the base of a cedar shrub, less than 3 feet from the path's edge, completely still against the pale limestone and dry brush. It struck her on the right ankle through the thin canvas of her sneaker. One strike. The guide heard the rattle a half-second before it happened. Not enough time. Wellen felt it immediately, a sharp burning at the ankle. The group stopped. The guide moved her away from the area and had her sit down on a flat section of rock. He checked the bite. 2 puncture marks, swelling already starting. He had a basic first aid kit, but no anti-venom. Private eco-tours in the area weren't required to carry it, and most didn't. He called for help within 2 minutes of the strike, gave their GPS coordinates, and kept the group calm. Standard procedure. He had dealt with minor injuries on tours before. Nothing had ever escalated like this. The swelling moved steadily, up the ankle, into the calf, her leg visibly distorting over the first hour. The pain was severe enough that she couldn't stay sitting upright. The guide had her lie down, kept her still, kept her talking. Around the 40-minute mark, her skin went pale and damp. Her pulse, when he checked it, was fast and weak. The venom was breaking down her ability to clot, driving internal hemorrhaging her body had no way to stop without anti-venom. She stayed conscious longer than anyone wanted her to be. The group was roughly 4 miles from the nearest accessible road. There was no way to carry her out in time. The terrain was too rough, the distance too far, and moving someone in hemorrhagic shock without medical support would have made it worse. All the guide could do was stay on the line with emergency personnel and keep her as still and calm as possible. She lost consciousness roughly 90 minutes after the bite. Emergency personnel reached the scene just over 2 hours after the initial call. The terrain made faster access impossible. She was still alive when they arrived. She didn't survive the evacuation. Wellen Tyndall was pronounced dead during evacuation at approximately 4:15 p.m. Post-mortem confirmed a single western diamondback envenomation to the right ankle. Cause of death was hemorrhagic shock, secondary to severe hemotoxic envenomation, with no anti-venom administered prior to death. The guide's emergency call logs, the group's GPS coordinates, and witness accounts from the remaining tour members were all noted in the findings. The case was ruled accidental. Nothing about the terrain, the tour operator's equipment requirements, or the response time fell outside what was considered standard. It was just a bad bite in the wrong place, 4 miles from the nearest road. It was May 18th, 2016. The afternoon sun blazed across rural farmland outside a city in central India, temperatures climbing past 95 degrees Fahrenheit as the dry season reached its peak. The heat shimmered off the dusty fields, creating waves of distortion in the distance. Rahul Patil worked alongside relatives, clearing brush from a field near their home. He was 24 years old, with a reputation among friends for taking risks that made others uncomfortable. His social media accounts showed a pattern of close encounters with animals, photos taken at distances that local elders warned against. Friends described him as someone who constantly sought attention and validation through increasingly dangerous stunts. Around 4:30 p.m., one of the workers spotted a spectacled cobra hiding beneath a pile of dry branches. The snake, likely seeking shade from the intense heat, remained coiled and motionless as the group gathered around. The worker who discovered it, an older man with decades of farming experience, immediately called for everyone to step back and give the snake space to escape. Spectacled cobras are highly venomous snakes, native to the Indian subcontinent. Adults typically measure between 4 and 6 feet in length. Their venom is primarily neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system and causing respiratory failure if untreated. A single bite can deliver enough venom to kill an adult human within hours, sometimes faster depending on the bite location and amount of venom injected. Instead of leaving the snake alone, Rahul grabbed a long stick and approached the cobra, ignoring the protests from the older workers. The snake's hood flared slightly, a clear warning signal that Rahul either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. He used the stick to pin the snake behind its head, then pulled out his phone with his free hand and positioned the camera at arm's length. He wanted something that would make people stop scrolling and pay attention. For several seconds, the snake remained relatively still, its movements restricted by the stick pressing against its neck. Rahul adjusted his grip, his attention focused entirely on the phone screen. He shifted his position slightly, bringing his face closer to the cobra to make the danger appear more dramatic. The other workers continued shouting warnings. One man moved forward as if to intervene but hesitated, unwilling to get close enough to risk being bitten himself. Then Rahul loosened his grip slightly while adjusting the angle of the phone. The cobra twisted its head sideways and upward with surprising speed, exploiting the momentary reduction in pressure. Rahul had angled the phone so close to his face that when the strike came, the fangs caught him on the left cheek before he could pull back. He jerked backward, dropping both the stick and his phone. The snake hit the ground and vanished into the surrounding brush within seconds. At first, Rahul insisted he was fine and laughed it off, even showing the photo he had taken moments earlier. His friends could see 2 small puncture marks on his left cheek, barely visible, but already beginning to swell. A thin trickle of blood ran down toward his jawline. Rahul wiped it away with the back of his hand, still smiling, still trying to maintain the appearance of control. Within 10 minutes, his demeanor began to change. He complained of a strange, tingling sensation spreading from the bite site across his face. His left eyelid started to droop. Within 20 minutes, he was dizzy, his speech slurred, complaining of difficulty swallowing. Friends loaded him into a vehicle and began the drive to the nearest medical facility, approximately 45 minutes away on rural roads. During the drive, Rahul's condition deteriorated rapidly. His breathing became shallow and labored, each breath requiring visible effort. He slumped against the door, his eyes half closed, no longer responding to questions from the others in the vehicle. The driver pushed the vehicle as fast as the rough roads would allow, honking continuously to clear livestock and pedestrians from the path. Other passengers called ahead to the medical facility, explaining the situation and requesting that antivenom be prepared. By the time they reached the facility, Rahul had lost consciousness, his breathing irregular with long pauses between breaths. Antivenom was administered immediately, but the delay had allowed the venom to advance far into his system. The facility had no mechanical ventilator. Staff attempted manual airway support, but sustaining adequate oxygenation by hand over hours is exhausting and inconsistent. Each lapse in rhythm allowed the paralysis to deepen. His blood pressure became unstable, requiring medication to maintain circulation. His family arrived within 2 hours of his admission, having been contacted by the workers who brought him in. They gathered in a waiting area, receiving periodic updates from medical staff about his deteriorating condition. He died approximately 8 hours after the bite. The cause of death was documented as respiratory failure caused by neurotoxic envenomation, with secondary complications, including cardiac arrest. The selfie, still saved on his phone, showed Rahul smiling with the cobra's head visible just inches from his face, its mouth slightly open in the moment before it struck. It was March 8, 2015, and the late afternoon sun beat down on the remote property outside Cuiabá, Mato Grosso, where a rotting wooden shed stood surrounded by dense scrubland. Inside, beneath the warped floorboards that creaked with every step, lived a massive bushmaster that an old farmer insisted was harmless to him. Odorico Feitosa was a 67-year-old retired farmer who had spent his entire life in the Mato Grosso region. His weathered hands and sun-darkened skin told the story of decades working the land, and his neighbors knew him as much for his competence as for his increasingly eccentric relationship with wildlife. Over the past year, Odorico had been feeding scraps and occasional dead rats to what he claimed was a single bushmaster snake living beneath his tool shed. He spoke of the serpent with proprietary affection, referring to it as his snake, describing how it had grown fat and lazy under his care. What made this dangerous obsession more troubling was Odorico's deep distrust of modern medicine. He had never visited a hospital in his adult life, believing that natural toughness and his body's resilience were superior to doctors and their interventions. That same stubbornness would prove fatal when his son-in-law, Marco, drove 3 hours that March day to help prepare the property for sale. Bushmasters are among the largest venomous snakes in the Americas, reaching lengths of up to 10 feet and weighing over 11 pounds. Their hemotoxic venom is among the most potent of any viper, designed to destroy blood cells and tissue. When threatened, bushmasters strike with remarkable speed and may deliver multiple bites in rapid succession. Marco arrived mid-afternoon. Odorico led Marco to the shed, explaining his intention to relocate the snake before potential buyers toured the property. The interior smelled of rot and stored animal feed. Bags of grain stacked against walls filmed with dust. Rats scattered across the rafters as the door swung open. Odorico crouched near the center of the floor where several boards sat loose, their edges splintered. He worked his fingers beneath them, prying them up with his bare hands. The bushmaster lay coiled in the dim space beneath the floorboards, easily 7 feet long and thick as a man's forearm. Its patterned scales were barely visible in the shadows created by the stored feed bags. Odorico reached down, perhaps intending to demonstrate his claimed rapport with the creature, when the snake's head snapped forward twice in rapid succession, fangs penetrating deep into his exposed forearm just below the elbow. The strikes happened too fast for Odorico to react. He jerked backward in surprise. Upon realizing what happened, Marco moved to help his father-in-law stand and wrapped a cloth loosely around his forearm to slow movement while attempting to call emergency services. Odorico waved him off repeatedly, insisting everything was fine. The older man refused water when Marco retrieved a bottle from the truck. Within 20 to 30 minutes, swelling had spread past Odorico's elbow, and dark bruising and patchy discoloration appeared around the bite and along the forearm. His fingers began to swell noticeably, the skin taut and shiny. Marco's assistants transformed into urgent pleas for Odorico to let him call an ambulance. He shook his head, even managing a laugh, maintaining his lifelong stance against hospitals. Marco begged him to reconsider, describing how his color was draining and how his lips had taken on a grayish tint. But Odorico's stubbornness held firm, even as his strength visibly ebbed. Over the next 4 hours, Odorico remained on the floor of the shed, his back propped against a support beam. The swelling continued spreading up his arm and across his chest. His speech became increasingly slurred, words running together as the venom's effects on his cardiovascular system intensified. Blood began seeping from his nose and the corners of his mouth, signs that his blood had lost its ability to clot properly. His breathing grew shallow and labored. Marco stayed beside him the entire time. By early evening, Odorico had stopped responding to questions. His eyes remained half open, but unfocused. His chest continued to rise and fall in irregular intervals. Just after 8 o'clock, roughly 4.5 hours after the bite, His breathing stopped entirely. Marco finally called emergency services, but it was far too late. The coroner's report, issued 3 days later, listed the cause of death as envenomation, resulting in cardiovascular collapse and internal hemorrhaging. Odorico's body remained in the shed until authorities arrived the following morning. The property was never sold. Wildlife officials later arrived equipped with snake hooks, tongs, and secure bags to capture the Bushmaster, which they relocated to a protected forest area several miles from human habitation. Marco would later tell investigators that his father-in-law had seemed convinced, until nearly the end, that his body would overcome the venom naturally, that his decades of toughness would see him through. It was June 14, 2013, in a quiet residential suburb outside Durban, in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. Thabo Ndlovu was 52 years old, a well-known community member who volunteered as a snake relocator. Over more than 15 years, he had removed and relocated over 200 snakes from homes and yards in the surrounding area. He performed these removals free of charge, viewing the work as a public service. At the time, South African law did not require formal certification for private snake handlers. His equipment reflected that informal status: a 3-foot snake hook, a canvas cloth snake bag, and thick leather work gloves. On 5 previous occasions, his call-outs had involved black mambas. Each of those removals had ended without injury. The call came at approximately 3:15 p.m. from a homeowner, Mrs. Sarah Botha. Her children had discovered a large snake inside their garage. Based on her description of its size and coloration, Thabo suspected a black mamba. He drove roughly 18 kilometers to the address. Upon arrival, Mrs. Botha explained that her younger child had seen the snake coiled in the far corner of the garage. Thabo assessed the situation from the open doorway. The snake was visible roughly 4 meters inside, its gray-brown body partially concealed behind stored items. Based on its proportions, it appeared to be a large specimen, estimated at approximately 9 to 10 feet in length. Mrs. Botha and her children retreated into the house while Thabo prepared to enter the garage. He indicated the removal would be brief. He stepped inside, carrying his snake hook and bag. The bag hung from his left shoulder, while his right hand held the hook extended in front of him. The snake remained coiled and alert, tracking his movement. Thabo positioned himself approximately 1 meter from the animal and slowly extended the hook toward its mid-body. Black mambas are Africa's longest venomous snakes, commonly reaching lengths of 8 to 10 feet. Despite their name, their bodies are typically gray or brown, with the black referring to the dark coloration inside their mouths. They are capable of extremely rapid movement and possess highly potent neurotoxic venom that interferes with nerve transmission, leading to progressive paralysis, particularly of the respiratory muscles. Black mambas are not inherently aggressive, but will strike defensively with speed when escape routes are limited. As the hook made contact, Thabo began lifting gently. The mamba reacted instantly. Its body twisted along the length of the hook, redirecting its head toward him. The first strike landed on the right side of his neck. Before he could retreat, the snake struck again, biting his left forearm, followed immediately by a third strike to his right shoulder. The entire sequence lasted only moments. The snake then dropped to the floor and escaped through a gap beneath the garage door. Thabo staggered backward and exited the garage. Blood was visible where the snake had struck his neck. The severity of the situation was immediately apparent, as bites near major blood vessels allow rapid systemic absorption of venom. He sat down against the exterior wall and instructed Mrs. Botha to call for an ambulance. Within minutes, early symptoms appeared. Excessive salivation developed, and a metallic taste became noticeable. His left eyelid began to droop, and swallowing grew difficult. Speech became increasingly slurred as muscle control weakened. A neighbor who was a physician arrived and remained with Thabo, monitoring his condition while emergency services were en route. By approximately 8 minutes after the bites, Thabo's breathing became labored, with shallow, effortful breaths. His ability to speak diminished further, and his vision narrowed as oxygen levels dropped. An ambulance arrived shortly thereafter. Paramedics initiated oxygen support and prepared for rapid transport, recognizing the signs of severe neurotoxic envenomation. Antivenom was not administered on scene and was instead prepared for immediate use upon hospital arrival. Thabo was transported to the nearest hospital, located less than 10 minutes away. Upon arrival, emergency staff administered antivenom and initiated mechanical ventilation. Despite aggressive treatment, including additional antivenom and cardiovascular support, Thabo's respiratory function continued to decline. He suffered cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead at 4:02 p.m., approximately 45 minutes after the initial bites. Post-mortem findings were consistent with severe neurotoxic envenomation leading to respiratory failure. The investigation that followed noted that Thabo's equipment was inadequate for handling a large black mamba in a confined space. His cloth bag offered no rigid containment, and the hook length provided limited margin for error. Authorities emphasized the importance of proper training and specialized equipment for snake removals involving highly venomous species. It was October 28, 2013, and the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Dallas sat silent under the Texas sun, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls telling the story of years of neglect and decay. The massive concrete structure had once housed a legitimate business, but recent investigations had revealed its use as a front for illegal exotic animal breeding operations that had been shut down months earlier by federal authorities. Tommy Chen had been hired by the property management company to clean out the warehouse in preparation for new tenants, a job that would provide much-needed extra income for his daughter's college fund. At 54, the hard-working maintenance worker had built a reputation for thorough, reliable service, but his experience was limited to conventional buildings, and he had no knowledge of the specialized dangers that might lurk in facilities used for exotic animal operations. The property management company had failed to inform Tommy about the building's previous use or the potential hazards that might remain from the illegal breeding operation. Their oversight would prove fatal, as the abandoned facility still contained evidence of its dangerous past in the form of escaped animals that had been surviving in the building's dark corners for months. Tommy approached the cleanup job with his characteristic thoroughness, systematically working through each section of the warehouse to remove debris and abandoned equipment. The building appeared to contain nothing more dangerous than broken glass and construction materials, reinforcing his assumption that the job would be routine and straightforward. Copperheads are among the most common venomous snakes in North America, possessing hemotoxic venom that causes tissue damage, swelling, and circulatory problems. These pit vipers typically reach lengths of 2 to 3 feet and are known for their defensive behavior when cornered or threatened. While their venom is generally less potent than other pit vipers, bites from large specimens can still cause serious medical complications, particularly when medical treatment is delayed. While moving equipment in a dark corner of the warehouse, Tommy accidentally stepped near the hiding place of a large copperhead that had escaped from a broken enclosure months earlier. The serpent had been surviving on small rodents that inhabited the abandoned building, and investigators noted that leaking pipes and shaded interior areas provided enough moisture and stable temperatures for long-term survival. The copperhead struck Tommy's ankle just above his work boot, its fangs penetrating his sock as it delivered a dose of hemotoxic venom. He reacted on instinct, pulling back and moving toward clearer light, before finally catching sight of the thick-bodied snake slipping into the shadows, its triangular head confirming it was venomous. He didn't have his phone on him. He had left it on the dashboard of his truck at the far end of the warehouse, assuming the cleanup job would be straightforward. He tried to make his way toward the exit, but the venom quickly triggered escalating swelling and pain at the bite site. Investigators noted a staggered trail of partial footprints and scuff marks leading from the bite location toward the exit, suggesting he had stopped multiple times as the swelling and pain increased. The hemotoxic venom caused progressive tissue damage and swelling that spread up Tommy's leg. Combined with his underlying health conditions, including unmanaged hypertension and early diabetes, and the prolonged delay in receiving medical treatment, the envenomation proved far more serious than typical copperhead bites. Tommy's condition deteriorated as he attempted to reach help. The combination of venom effects, stress, and his existing medical issues overwhelmed his system. He collapsed in the warehouse parking lot beside his truck, unable to complete his journey to the hospital. Investigators estimated he collapsed roughly 60 to 90 minutes after the bite, based on the position of his vehicle and the condition of the bite site. Tommy's family discovered his body the following day when he failed to return home from work. The investigation revealed the building's previous use as an illegal exotic animal breeding facility and the presence of escaped venomous snakes that posed ongoing dangers to anyone entering the structure. The incident exposed the broader problem of inadequate cleanup procedures following the shutdown of illegal animal operations and led to new protocols requiring specialized hazmat teams for buildings that had housed dangerous species. Tommy's death highlighted the hidden dangers that could persist long after illegal operations were officially closed. His family's lawsuit against the property management company resulted in improved disclosure requirements and safety protocols for maintenance workers assigned to buildings with unknown histories. The tragedy served as a reminder that the exotic animal trade's dangers extended far beyond the immediate participants to innocent workers and community members. It was October 14th, 2016. The Atchafalaya Basin in south-central Louisiana is one of those places that feels totally manageable during the day. Cypress trees, open water, the occasional splash of something moving through the shallows. At night, it's a completely different place. The terrain that season was rougher than usual. Weeks of rain had left the ground saturated, root clusters and debris pushed to the surface, footing unpredictable in the low light. The kind of conditions that slow you down and keep your eyes on your feet instead of what's ahead. But that didn't stop Ruth Ann Tharp. She was 57, had spent nearly 30 years teaching biology at a small community college in central Louisiana, and when retirement came, she traded the classroom for something she loved even more: solo night surveys, personal documentation, a field notebook she'd been filling since 2014. She wasn't chasing credentials or recognition. She just genuinely loved it. She had done this same route in the basin multiple times over the previous 2 seasons and knew it well enough to feel confident going back alone. Familiarity has a way of making dangerous places feel safe. The timber rattlesnake is one of the most widely distributed venomous snakes in North America, and in the Gulf Coast lowlands of Louisiana, it carries something most people don't know about: a venom that runs primarily hemotoxic, tissue destruction, clotting failure, hemorrhagic shock. But some Gulf Coast populations carry neurotoxic components that can contribute to muscle weakness and respiratory difficulty. It's not consistent across the population, and it's not guaranteed, but it's documented. And in the wrong circumstances, it adds another variable nobody wants. Adults run between 3 and 5 feet. They're not aggressive, but they hold their ground. In low light, against a submerged root cluster, you won't see one until it's already decided you're too close. Ruth Ann entered the basin from a gravel road access point just after 8:30 p.m. The water in the first stretch was low, barely above her ankles, and she moved through it slowly, sweeping her flashlight ahead. Within 40 minutes, she had documented a banded water snake and what she noted as a possible juvenile rat snake near a root cluster. Things were going fine. She kept moving. By 9:15, the water was just below her knees, higher than she'd seen on previous visits. The footing underneath was rough, soft mud and submerged roots she couldn't see through the dark water. She slowed down, but didn't turn back. Her headlamp had been running for over 2 hours by then. The beam was noticeably weaker than when she started. The section she was entering around 9:30 was a wider flat she had surveyed before, usually one of the better stretches of her route. But with the elevated water, root clusters and debris that normally sat above the surface were now submerged and invisible. Her journal's last entry, at 9:22 p.m., noted the water was higher than expected. She wrote that she planned to push another 200 feet before turning back. Her camera's last image was captured at 9:31. Open water, a partially submerged root mass in the frame. No snake visible. What happened next can only be partially pieced together. The most likely sequence is that Ruth Ann stepped too close to a timber rattlesnake, resting against that submerged root cluster, motionless in the low light, invisible until she was already too close. It didn't retreat. It struck, 2 puncture marks on the back of her left calf, right in the gap between the top of her wading boot and her field pants. Significant venom load. The burning started immediately, then the swelling. But what overtook both within minutes was something else, a heaviness in her chest, her breathing shallowing out. Whether from the venom's effects on her muscles, from shock, or both, Her body was losing the fight faster than she could walk out of it. Her legs were going. Her coordination was gone. She was found face down in 19 inches of water, but the water wasn't what killed her. A crawfish trapper heading into the basin before dawn spotted her body and called it in. Search personnel located her roughly 40 feet from where her field bag and notebook were recovered, partially submerged near a root cluster. Her headlamp was floating face down nearby, still switched on. The flashlight was never found. Post-mortem confirmed envenomation, with both hemotoxic and neurotoxic components consistent with Gulf Coast timber rattlesnake venom. Cause of death was cardiorespiratory failure secondary to envenomation, hemorrhagic shock, systemic venom load, and possible neurotoxic contribution to respiratory compromise. She was face down in shallow water, alone, with no way out. The case was ruled accidental. No prior snakebite history or venom sensitivity. It was November 23, 2017, in the bustling coastal city of Recife, Brazil, where modern apartment buildings rose from streets lined with palm trees and the constant sound of traffic mixed with tropical bird song. The humid air carried the scent of the nearby Atlantic Ocean, creating a warm environment far removed from the deep rainforest habitats, where many of Brazil's most secretive reptiles naturally lived. Evening humidity clung to the concrete walls, and distant headlights reflected faintly across the apartment's windows, while ceiling fans hummed steadily against the coastal heat. Rasker Dwelt, a 26-year-old university biology student, had converted a spare room in his third-floor apartment into a reptile sanctuary, housing his small but carefully maintained collection of native Brazilian snakes. Known among classmates for his academic focus and methodical research habits, Rasker was preparing a graduate thesis on venomous snake ecology and behavior. He kept detailed notebooks on feeding cycles, enclosure conditions, and behavioral observations, hoping to build a career in conservation research. His apartment sat in a quiet, residential neighborhood, nowhere near the dense forests where most of his species originated. The converted room contained terrariums with controlled temperature and humidity, designed to approximate natural conditions as closely as possible in an urban setting. Recently, through illegal wildlife trafficking contacts, Rasker had obtained a dangerous species rarely seen in private ownership, a large bushmaster transported from remote northern rainforest regions. Such a snake almost never appeared in private apartments outside criminal trade or specialized facilities. It was being kept temporarily in a hastily assembled enclosure while he awaited delivery of a reinforced habitat. The makeshift terrarium was secured only by a heavy textbook placed over the sliding glass lid, lacking proper locks or safety barriers required for handling a large, venomous viper. Though academically knowledgeable, Rasker had limited real-world handling experience with animals of this size and medical significance. Late that evening, with his roommates away for the weekend, he decided to adjust the enclosure's humidity to better match rainforest levels. The bushmaster is South America's largest venomous snake, capable of reaching impressive lengths and delivering medically serious envenomation. Despite their size and reputation, bushmasters are typically shy, defensive animals that rely on camouflage and avoidance rather than aggression. When threatened, they usually deliver a rapid defensive strike and release rather than holding on. Their bites are rare but medically urgent, especially when treatment is delayed. Hidden beneath artificial foliage near the front of the enclosure, the snake remained motionless and nearly invisible. Exhausted from studying and unable to see its exact position, Rasker slid the lid aside and reached in to reposition the water dish. Startled by the sudden intrusion, the bushmaster launched a fast defensive strike. Its fangs pierced his right wrist, delivering venom in a brief contact before the snake immediately released and recoiled deeper into the enclosure. Rasker stumbled backward, knocking the lid to the floor as he clutched his wrist. 2 puncture wounds bled steadily, while pain began spreading through his arm. Shaken, he wrapped a cloth around the bite and searched for his phone, trying to steady his breathing. Within the next hour, swelling gradually intensified along his forearm, accompanied by nausea, dizziness, and increasing weakness, serious signs of progressive envenomation rather than the instantaneous collapse often imagined. A metallic taste formed in his mouth, and his vision began to blur as anxiety mixed with the venom's systemic effects. Still conscious but deteriorating, Rasker attempted to sit down and call for help. His coordination worsened as the venom disrupted his circulation and damaged tissue internally. Unable to focus and growing faint, he eventually collapsed near his desk sometime later in the night, the room silent except for the faint hum of enclosure heaters and the distant sound of traffic far below. He was found critically ill several hours later when a concerned classmate arrived the next morning after repeated unanswered messages and calls. Emergency services transported him to a hospital, but the overnight delay before treatment and the severity of the bite had already caused extensive internal complications. Despite intensive care, including anti-venom administration and organ support, he died later that day. Hospital staff later documented the case as a rare urban envenomation involving an illegally kept rainforest species. Authorities investigating the incident uncovered the illegal wildlife trafficking channel responsible for supplying the snake. The case prompted renewed discussion about the dangers of privately keeping high-risk venomous reptiles and led the university to tighten oversight of student research involving live animals. Rasker's family later spoke publicly about the risks of unregulated exotic animal ownership, emphasizing that academic curiosity must be matched with proper safety infrastructure, training, and legal oversight. It was April 22, 2017. The afternoon heat pressed down on a village in eastern Indonesia, humidity making the air feel thick and oppressive as Rizky Aditya walked along a drainage ditch beside a rice field. Rizky was 19 years old and had recently started posting short wildlife videos online, hoping to build a following that might eventually generate income. He had grown up in the village, the youngest of 4 children in a family that struggled financially. He saw social media as his path to a better life, studying successful content creators obsessively, analyzing what made their videos popular. King cobras are the world's longest venomous snakes, with adults commonly reaching 10 to 13 feet. Their venom is highly potent and delivered in large quantities, capable of killing an adult human within 30 minutes in severe cases. Unlike many snake species, king cobras are known for their intelligence and aggressive defense of territory. Around 3 p.m., Rizky and a friend discovered a subadult king cobra near the drainage ditch, approximately 5 feet long and fully capable of delivering a dangerous bite. Rizky immediately decided it would make the perfect clip. He instructed his friend to record on a second phone while he used a stick to interact with the snake, narrating dramatically about his special connection with dangerous animals. The cobra's hood flared repeatedly as Rizky manipulated it, moving it from side to side. His friend repeatedly suggested they let the snake go. Rizky dismissed these concerns, insisting the footage was going to be amazing. At one point, he attempted to tap the snake's head gently so it would flare its hood more dramatically for the camera. Instead, the cobra followed the stick upward and struck forward with remarkable speed. Its fangs caught his right hand between the thumb and index finger. The snake released within a fraction of a second. The bite happened on camera, captured from 2 angles. For several seconds, Rizky seemed confused, staring at the puncture marks before panic set in. The more significant signs were immediate and systemic. Intense burning pain, spreading numbness moving rapidly up his arm, fingers tingling and growing difficult to move within minutes. Villagers helped transport Rizky on a motorcycle to a vehicle that could take him to a medical facility approximately 40 minutes away. During transport, his blood pressure began dropping. He vomited twice, complained of dizziness. His words came out fragmented and effortful. His eyelids drooped noticeably. He told his friend his vision was going double. At the facility, he received antivenom, a regional polyvalent formulation intended for Asian elapids, used as an emergency substitute in the absence of king cobra-specific antivenom. But the supply was critically limited. The facility had only 2 vials on hand. The recommended treatment for a bite of this severity required 10 to 15. Staff urgently requested additional doses from a larger hospital, but transfer would take hours the facility did not have. His condition deteriorated steadily. His heart rate, initially elevated, began to slow as his respiratory muscles weakened, a shift from tachycardia to bradycardia the attending staff recognized as an ominous sign. Saliva pooled at the corners of his mouth. A faint bluish tinge appeared around his lips. His arms and legs grew heavy and unresponsive as the venom continued blocking neuromuscular transmission. His breathing became rapid and shallow, then gave way to longer and longer pauses, a pattern of apnea the staff recognized as the final stage before respiratory arrest. The additional antivenom had not yet arrived. His family arrived at the facility within 2 hours of his admission, having traveled from a neighboring village. They gathered around his bed as medical staff worked to stabilize him, but the resources available were simply inadequate for the severity of his envenomation. The additional antivenom had not yet arrived. Rizki lost consciousness approximately 4 hours after the bite. His breathing became increasingly irregular before stopping completely. Without mechanical ventilation or adequate antivenom, resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. He died approximately 5 hours after the bite. The cause of death was respiratory failure caused by neurotoxic envenomation from a king cobra bite. His friend deleted the footage from both phones immediately and never spoke publicly about what happened. It was June 10th, 2017, the sun already climbing high over the colonial hacienda in Oaxaca, Mexico, where 50 wedding guests gathered in the garden to celebrate. By noon, this event would be transformed into a medical emergency that rural infrastructure was not equipped to handle. Tobias Rivera was 34 years old, the eldest of 3 brothers and fiercely protective of his younger siblings. He worked as a delivery driver in Mexico City, a job that kept him away from family for weeks at a time. His reputation at family gatherings was well established. He drank heavily, usually mezcal, and his behavior became increasingly reckless as the night wore on. His mother often joked, with thinly veiled concern, that Tobias would either fight someone or injure himself before any celebration ended. That morning, Tobias had arrived at the hacienda 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. He had already consumed several glasses of mezcal by 10 a.m., greeting relatives with loud embraces and exaggerated stories. His younger brother, the groom, had asked him twice to slow down on the drinking, to no avail. Around 11:30 a.m., as guests milled around the garden waiting for the ceremony to begin, Tobias spotted movement in the shrubs. The snake, approximately 5 feet long with distinctive brown and tan patterns, had been disturbed by foot traffic and was likely attempting to relocate to quieter territory. The fer de lance, known locally as Barba amarilla, is among the most dangerous snakes in Central America. Adults are typically about 4 to 6 feet long, though very large females can exceed 8 feet, and specimens may weigh up to about 13 pounds. These pit vipers possess hemotoxic venom that attacks blood cells and tissue. A single bite can deliver enough venom to cause catastrophic internal bleeding, with symptoms progressing rapidly. Tobias pointed it out to several bridesmaids standing nearby, laughing at their nervous reactions. One of the hacienda staff, a maid named Rosa, who was refilling water pitchers, saw what he was looking at and immediately warned him to stay away from it. She explained in Spanish that it was extremely dangerous and that he should alert the groundskeeper. Tobias dismissed her concern with a wave, his judgment severely impaired by alcohol. Tobias approached the snake with exaggerated stealth, crouching low and making theatrical gestures to the watching crowd. The snake coiled tighter, raising its head in a defensive posture. He reached down and grabbed the snake behind its head, but his grip was imprecise and likely weakened by intoxication. The fer de lance twisted with surprising strength, its body whipping around his forearm. The strike happened in less than a second. The snake's head jerked forward, and its fangs punctured the back of Tobias's right hand between the thumb and index finger, embedding fully before retracting. The venom, injected deep into muscle tissue, began its work immediately. Tobias's face transformed from drunken amusement to shock. He screamed and flung the snake away, watching it disappear back into the shrubs. Tobias clutched his hand, staring at the 2 puncture wounds. He staggered toward a stone bench where his brother and several guests rushed to support him. The groom held Tobias in a seated position, while his uncle kept the arm immobilized, removed rings and watches, and instructed someone to call for an ambulance. Bystanders were careful not to tighten anything into a tourniquet or cut the skin. The bite site began to swell noticeably. The pain intensified, described by envenomation victims as burning combined with crushing pressure. Dark bruising crept up from his wrist as blood vessels ruptured beneath the surface. He felt dizzy and briefly confused before his speech slurred. Blood began seeping from his gums, a sign that the venom was destroying his blood's ability to clot. By 30 minutes post-bite, Tobias was struggling to remain upright, his breathing shallow and rapid. Rosa called emergency services immediately, but the nearest hospital with antivenin was 56 miles away in Oaxaca City, over rural roads, with a minimum 40-minute response. Tobias's arm swelled to nearly twice its size, skin black and purple, and he vomited blood-tinged fluid onto his white wedding shirt as his blood pressure dropped from accelerating internal hemorrhage. The ambulance arrived 43 minutes after the initial call. Paramedics immediately started an IV line and administered pain medication. During transport, Tobias remained conscious, but increasingly unresponsive. His entire arm had become grotesquely swollen, and bleeding from his mouth and nose indicated widespread vascular damage. He arrived at the hospital approximately 70 minutes after the bite. Medical staff administered polyvalent antivenin, but the delay had allowed extensive tissue damage and internal bleeding to progress. Despite aggressive treatment, Tobias suffered cardiac arrest and died at 1:47 p.m. The wedding was canceled, and most guests departed that afternoon in stunned silence. Tobias's family held a quiet funeral 3 days later in Oaxaca, attended only by immediate relatives. It was September 2nd, 2017, in the remote wilderness of Australia's Northern Territory, where the Adelaide River winds through dense floodplain scrubland beneath paperbarks and pandanus palms. The landscape stretched endlessly, a maze of wetlands, billabongs, and wooded corridors, largely unchanged for millennia. During the late dry season, much of the terrain was cut off from vehicle access, reachable only by shallow draft boat or rough bush track that became impassable beyond certain points. Laura Quint, a 29-year-old freelance travel blogger and wildlife photographer, had ventured into this isolated floodplain with 2 close friends for what was meant to be a routine camping trip. Known for her fearless approach to capturing nature's raw beauty, Laura specialized in close-range wildlife photography that set her work apart from conventional shots. Her blog had gained a devoted following among adventure enthusiasts who admired her willingness to move beyond established campgrounds and explore less-traveled river corridors. They established their campsite on a narrow strip of elevated ground several kilometers from the nearest maintained access track. The site required a 2-hour boat ride from the nearest launch point and sat well beyond reliable mobile coverage. The nearest regional hospital, equipped with anti-venom and critical care facilities, was hours away by air under ideal conditions. The area was known for its dense population of venomous snakes during the dry season, when animals concentrated near permanent waterways. Warning notices at ranger stations emphasized that emergency retrieval could be significantly delayed due to terrain, weather, or aircraft availability. Still, Laura trusted her ability to move quietly without disturbing the wildlife she sought to photograph. As her friends prepared dinner, she wandered alone along the scrubland edge, drawn by movement near a massive fallen log, roughly 50 meters from their tents. The coastal taipan is one of Australia's most medically significant venomous snakes, equipped with potent neurotoxic venom capable of causing progressive paralysis if untreated. Though generally shy, they strike when startled or cornered. Serious envenomation can lead to worsening weakness and respiratory compromise over several hours without timely antivenom and airway support. In modern Australia, fatalities are rare and usually involve significant delays in reaching care. Laura approached the fallen log wearing lightweight hiking boots that offered little protection. The late afternoon sun cast long long shadows through the scrubland where bark and leaf litter blended together. As she crouched to photograph the log's textured surface, a concealed coastal taipan reacted to the sudden proximity. The snake struck once, piercing her left ankle before retreating under the timber. Startled and unsure of the severity, Laura made her way toward camp. Within the first hour, nausea and tingling spread. By the time she reached her friends, her speech had grown strained and her movements unsteady. Recognizing the puncture marks, they applied pressure immobilization bandaging and kept her completely still. They activated their satellite emergency beacon and contacted retrieval services, providing coordinates and medical details. The response was complicated. Their location sat in low floodplain country, unsuitable for immediate helicopter landing. The nearest viable landing zone required clearing debris and marking ground nearly a kilometer away across uneven, muddy terrain. Another medical retrieval was already underway elsewhere in the territory, meaning the closest aircraft required significant transit time. As dusk settled, Laura's condition worsened. Over several hours, the neurotoxins interfered with muscle control. Her eyelids drooped, her voice weakened. Breathing became increasingly labored as respiratory muscles fatigued. Her friends maintained immobilization and supported her airway as long as possible, relaying updates through intermittent satellite signal. The helicopter eventually launched, but distance, darkness, and safe approach slowed progress. By the time paramedics trekked in, Laura had entered advanced respiratory failure. Despite aggressive intervention upon arrival, the prolonged delay without ventilatory support and anti-venom proved decisive. After many hours in remote terrain without definitive care, she succumbed before evacuation could be completed. The incident prompted renewed emphasis on the realities of extreme remoteness in parts of the Northern Territory, where even with advanced emergency infrastructure, geography can impose critical delays. Authorities reinforced guidance about avoiding solitary excursions, wearing protective gaiters, carrying redundant communication, and assessing evacuation feasibility before establishing remote camps. The photography community mourned the loss of one of their most passionate young talents, and her story became a reminder that in Australia's far reaches, survival can depend not only on medical capability, but on how long it takes to reach it. It was March 3, 2015. The Big Cypress Swamp in southwest Florida is a massive, low-lying wetland, sawgrass flats, cypress strands, and shallow sloughs that bleed into each other with no clean line between dry ground and standing water. In early March, the dry season is still holding, but depending on where you step, the water in the deeper sloughs can still run anywhere from ankle to knee deep. Ray Renshaw was 54 and had spent his entire adult life around snakes, not as a hobbyist, but as an independent field herpetologist who worked alone, funded his own research, and answered to nobody. Just decades of field work, and a name that meant something in very specific circles. He had been bitten before. Minor incidents he logged like data points, rather than close calls. But after enough of those, does the risk ever really feel real anymore? Now, the eastern diamondback. Largest venomous snake in North America, adults regularly hitting 5 to 6 feet and pushing past 10 pounds. Their venom is hemotoxic. It destroys red blood cells, breaks down tissue, and shuts down your ability to clot. A bite to the hand is especially bad since the hand has little muscle mass to buffer absorption, and venom spreads quickly through the lymphatic system, meaning systemic effects follow local tissue destruction rapidly. Swelling sets in within minutes, and without treatment, the envenomation can become life-threatening within hours, as coagulopathy and hemorrhagic shock set in. They don't chase. They just sit there, coiled and completely still against dry grass and leaf litter, and wait for something to make a mistake. Ray had been working a stretch of the Big Cypress he knew well, a corridor he had surveyed multiple times over the previous 3 years. He went in alone, which was just normal for him. He had a snake hook, a field bag, a camera, and his phone. No radio. He hadn't told anyone exactly where he was going, just that he'd be out in the field. Same as always. He entered from a pull-off along a remote access road just after 7 a.m., while the air was still cool, around 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Eastern diamondbacks are most active in the morning during cooler months, moving around to warm up before temperatures climb. The first 2 hours went fine. Ray covered roughly a mile of terrain, photographed track impressions, and documented 2 non-venomous species. His camera showed steady movement through the corridor until around 9:20 a.m., and then something stopped him. The last photo in the sequence is a dense patch of palmetto scrub at the edge of a cypress strand. That's exactly the kind of spot an eastern diamondback would sit in all morning and wait. At some point in that scrub, Ray found what he was looking for. He set his field bag down. His snake hook wasn't in his hand. That's not what an accidental encounter looks like. That's someone getting into position, taking their time, doing exactly what they've done hundreds of times before. Ray knew what he was dealing with. He'd handled animals like this his entire career, and so he did what Ray Renshaw always did. He went for it. The snake struck before he could secure it. A single fast hit to the right hand, between the thumb and index finger. The venom moved fast. Swelling in the hand and forearm started within minutes. Burning pain, nausea, blood pressure dropping hard. At some point, Ray reached for his phone. Whether he couldn't get to it in time or couldn't manage it with a hand that was already swelling badly, no call ever went out. His last outgoing call was at 7:12 a.m., before he even entered the corridor. Ray tried to walk out anyway. He had maybe an hour of real mobility, but exertion accelerates venom spread, and every step he took worked against him. The swelling was already past his wrist. His blood pressure was dropping. By the time he'd covered a third of a mile, his body was already failing. A neighbor expected Ray back by evening and thought nothing of it at first. By the next morning, no truck in the driveway, no answer on his phone. She reached out to someone who knew his field habits, and that's when the search started. His vehicle was found at the access road pull-off, and his body was located later that afternoon, more than 24 hours after the bite. Post-mortem confirmed a single eastern diamondback envenomation to the right hand, massive tissue destruction, systemic hemorrhaging, cardiovascular collapse. His camera, field bag, and snake hook were all recovered at the scene. His phone had no outgoing calls after 7:12 a.m. The case was ruled accidental, with findings noting that solo entry into remote terrain without any communication equipment left no possibility of outside intervention once the envenomation occurred. It was August 3rd, 2014, late on a warm Saturday night on the outskirts of a small desert community in rural Arizona, temperatures still hovering above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, even after sunset. The nearest town with a full-service hospital was over 70 miles away on a 2-lane highway that wound through open desert. Daniel Mercer, 31, was drinking with 2 friends in his backyard. Daniel worked as a warehouse supervisor and was known for his competitive nature and tendency to accept any challenge, particularly after drinking. His friends later told investigators he had consumed at least 6 beers over the previous 2 hours, possibly more. Daniel had moved to the area 3 years earlier from a Midwestern state where venomous snakes were rare. He had received multiple warnings from neighbors about rattlesnakes that frequently appeared in yards during summer months, and had dismissed them as exaggeration. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are among the most dangerous snakes in North America. Their venom destroys blood cells and tissue while disrupting the body's ability to clot. Without treatment, severe bites can lead to life-threatening bleeding complications. Fatalities in the United States are rare. Fewer than 1 in 200 documented bites results in death when treatment is available. That statistic, however, assumes prompt access to antivenom, a sober victim, and a hospital within reach. Around 11:15 p.m., one of the friends noticed a western diamondback moving slowly along the block wall at the edge of the property. The distinctive rattle immediately caught everyone's attention. Instead of backing away, Daniel decided to prove he could handle it. He had watched videos online of professionals catching snakes and believed the technique looked simple, unaware that those handlers had years of training, proper equipment, and were completely sober. Ignoring the continuous rattling, Daniel walked over to where the snake had paused near a potted plant, his steps unsteady from alcohol. He attempted to grab the snake by the tail, his movements uncoordinated, his depth perception impaired. The moment he lifted it, the rattlesnake twisted mid-air and bit his right forearm approximately 4 inches below the elbow. The fangs penetrated deeply into the muscle tissue beneath. The snake released and dropped within a second, then retreated along the wall and disappeared. Even after being bitten, Daniel laughed and tried to step toward it again. A friend physically pulled him backward. Only when his arm began swelling rapidly did Daniel realize the seriousness of the situation. The tissue became discolored and extremely painful, with 2 puncture wounds already surrounded by spreading purple and red discoloration. His hand went numb, and he began to feel nauseated and lightheaded. His friends called emergency services. The dispatcher informed them the nearest ambulance was over 40 miles away and advised them to drive to the regional hospital, keeping Daniel's arm immobilized below heart level. They pulled out of the property at 11:34 p.m., more than 15 minutes after the bite. The drive was long and rough. Over the course of the next hour, the swelling spread steadily across most of his forearm, the discoloration deepening as they pushed through the dark desert highway. His fingers grew stiff and difficult to move. He was vomiting and sweating heavily as the swelling continued to spread, his strength visibly draining with each mile. The discoloration had crept well beyond the original bite site by the time the hospital lights appeared in the distance. They arrived at the hospital at 12:51 a.m., approximately 1 hour and 17 minutes after the bite. Staff administered antivenom immediately and began aggressive fluid resuscitation. The delay had allowed the hemotoxic venom to cause extensive tissue damage and disrupt his blood's ability to clot. Lab results confirmed severe coagulopathy, with clotting factors significantly depleted. Bleeding developed at insertion sites and failed to stop normally. He was transferred to intensive care and received blood products alongside continued antivenom treatment. His condition stabilized briefly in the early morning hours, raising cautious optimism among the medical team. Daniel's family, contacted in the early hours of the morning, made the drive from a neighboring county and arrived at the hospital around 6 a.m. They were told his condition was critical, but that the medical team was continuing to work. Through the morning and into the afternoon of August 4th, the team worked to replace what his body kept losing. Then, late in the afternoon, his situation worsened significantly. Internal bleeding had developed in his gastrointestinal tract, a late but recognized complication of severe hemotoxic envenomation. When prolonged clotting failure begins damaging blood vessel walls, the losses compounded faster than they could be replaced. His cardiovascular system, unable to maintain adequate circulation against the ongoing hemorrhage, began to fail. He died at 9:22 p.m. on August 4th, approximately 22 hours after the bite. The cause of death was hemotoxic envenomation with severe coagulopathy and hemorrhagic shock, an outcome made possible by the combination of a large venom load, significant alcohol intoxication blunting his early response, and over an hour without treatment in the desert. His friends, who had driven him through the dark in a desperate attempt to reach help, were left traumatized by the experience. It was October 18th, 2014, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the private lodge near Hoedspruit. Jared Van Zyl stood near the grill, beer in hand, about to make a fatal decision. Jared was a 41-year-old IT consultant from Johannesburg, known among colleagues for his habit of correcting others and refusing to defer to expertise he hadn't personally verified. His wife had stayed home with their 2 children. This weekend trip to the bush was meant to be networking, a chance to impress potential clients with his confidence and outdoor knowledge. Jared had arrived 2 days earlier, irritating staff with unsolicited advice on everything from fences to predator behavior. The lodge owner, Willem, learned to nod and move on. Coworkers said his trip was all about proving himself, showing city colleagues he could handle the bush and knowledge he'd never tested. The Braai area, a semi-covered space with wooden benches and a large stone grill, offered savanna views while staying near the lodge. A small wood pile was stacked nearby for the evening, though staff normally keep wood in a locked shed. The boomslang appeared around 5:30 p.m., a young male roughly 4 feet long with vibrant green scales moving through the low brush behind the Braai area. These rear-fanged colubrid snakes grow up to 6 feet in length and possess hemotoxic venom that destroys blood cells and prevents clotting. Unlike vipers with their immediate, dramatic symptoms, boomslang venom works insidiously. Victims may feel nothing for hours while the toxin systematically dismantles their circulatory system. Willem spotted it first and ordered everyone back, moved to fetch the lodge's snake tongs, and radioed for the on-call handler, but Jared kept pressing the point. Willem identified it clearly as a boomslang and warned the 6 guests present to give it a wide berth. Jared immediately contradicted him, pulling out his phone and insisting it was a harmless green mamba, despite the fact that green mambas are not found in that region. Willem corrected him. Jared argued louder, becoming increasingly belligerent as others sided with Willem. For nearly 20 minutes, Jared debated. He cited websites, mentioned videos, dismissed Willem's 30 years of bush experience. The snake remained motionless, coiled in a low shrub near the woodpile, its posture more like a startled boomslang than an actively hunting mamba. Other guests moved inside, uncomfortable with the escalating argument and the proximity to the reptile. Willem's wife, Anna, suggested calling a snake handler from town. Jared laughed, said that was dramatic and unnecessary. Then, to prove his point, he approached the shrub. Willem shouted a warning. Jared reached out, attempting the risky, amateur hand grasp he'd seen from videos. The boomslang, disturbed and defensive, twisted with surprising speed. Jared's grip was poor, his fingers too far back. The snake's head swiveled and it bit down on his wrist before Jared flung it away into the grass. He examined his wrist. 2 small puncture marks, barely bleeding. Jared declared it had not broken skin properly, that there was nothing to worry about. Willem urged him to go immediately to the hospital in Hoedspruit, explaining that boomslang venom was delayed, but catastrophic. Jared refused, citing the minor appearance of the wound and his lack of pain. He washed his hand at the outdoor sink, wrapped it in a napkin, and returned to drinking. For the next 4 hours, Jared continued socializing, eating grilled meat, drinking 3 more beers. He showed other guests his hand, pointing to the tiny marks as evidence of overreaction. Around 10 p.m., he began to feel nauseous and mentioned a headache. By 11 p.m., small bruises had appeared along his forearm, not from impact, but spontaneously, as blood vessels ruptured beneath his skin. Anna noticed the bruising when Jared reached for water. She insisted he look at his arms. Dark, purple patches spread from wrist to elbow. Jared touched his gums with his tongue and tasted copper. They were bleeding without provocation. His nose began to drip blood. Dizziness made him sit down heavily. Willem called the regional hospital immediately. Around 11:20 p.m., they confirmed what he already knew. The nearest known stock of the specific antivenom was held at a provincial center, several hours' drive away, and provincial logistics meant delivery would take time. An ambulance was dispatched, but would take 90 minutes to reach the remote lodge. Willem urged Jared to stay awake, but Jared, now frightened and pale, insisted on lying down in his room. By 1 a.m., when the ambulance arrived, Jared was semi-conscious. At triage, the medics noted fang marks in the thumb webbing, and later labs showed markedly prolonged clotting times and low fibrinogen, consistent with severe hemotoxic envenomation. By this time, he was semi-conscious with evidence of severe internal bleeding. Clinicians later documented hemorrhage into the head and chest. Paramedics transported him to the hospital, but without antivenin, intervention was futile. Jared Van Zyl was pronounced dead hours later. The lodge owner filed an incident report with local health authorities, emphasizing that the victim had been warned repeatedly and acted against explicit advice. Jared's family received his remains 4 days later, his death certificate listing the cause simply as boomslang envenomation, accidental but entirely preventable.